Hello, everyone. My name's Jen Brown. I run an organization called The Engaging Educator, and we actually take improv to help people with their communication, public speaking, and social skills. I was at a museum for a very long time in New York, which is how I met Rebecca. And I started my company actually working with museums. So, helping museum educators connect improv to their everyday, whether they're dealing with visitors, inspiring play in your galleries, which is something that I know you're all working on, or working on yourself and your confidence. So it was really nice to see the confidence piece come in. I was kind of like watching from the background. I really tap into the idea of practical improv. While I really love the confidence point of it, I'm all about those connective tissues. Like, how can we use what we learned right now? And before I really get started, I want to introduce and tell you a little bit about the snow situation here. So I live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina now, and we actually got 15 inches of snow on Sunday, which with one plow in the whole town, I think, is not a good situation. So we're here. This is my husband, Alex, who will introduce himself because he's not just some random guy I picked up off of my apartment walls. He's got a lot of connection to improv. So I'm going to actually let him start, and then we'll dig a little deeper into things. But before that, I really want you to think about what you just experienced that last hour and what worked for you. Like, what is something that you could see yourself using at the Peoria Playhouse with your visitors, with the guests, with the kids, with anything, even in your everyday? What's something that really, really worked and something that didn't work? That you're like, this was fun for me, but I really don't think I could use it in my everyday. So on that, while you're thinking, I'll let Alex introduce himself.
So hi everyone, my name's Alex Brown. I again also live in Winston-Salem. A little bit of background about me. I'm originally from the Quad Cities, so not too far away from Peoria. I got my master's in museum studies from Western Illinois, and then I moved to North Carolina to work at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art, which is just the contemporary art center here, like in Winston, and they call it the Triad. So it's like our version of the Quad Cities, kind of, but a little more spread out. And I'm the director of audience engagement there. And that role is everything from developing educational programs to coming up with public programs and different things to really offer the best we can to the public. And a little bit of background about that place. It's just a contemporary art museum with a historic house and about 32 acres of land. So it's a very kind of a strange organization. And I've applied improv a lot over the past 4 years in that position. And we'll probably get into this a little bit more, but when I first started working there, I was not a good educator, I think I can say.
You don't have to look at me for that.
I know. I fell into that. I came in with a very traditional like museum ed background. And in my experience, I learned that there was a big part of that was missing, which was really considering and thinking about your audience more than what you're trying to give to that audience. So my background before I got there was very, okay, I have to teach this, I have to teach that, I have to get this across. And that turned out to be a major detriment. And I would catch myself and be caught in the position of correcting kids and like saying, well, actually to the kids when they offered a suggestion. And I didn't realize that I was basically telling these kids that they were wrong in like my own, like when I was giving programs and everything. And then when I started to incorporate more improv into my teaching style, it became much more interactive, much more participatory, and a better experience for everyone. And one of the programs I'm going to talk about specifically today is a junior K museum school that I've been running at SECA for the past 4 years, which has a lot of improv in its bones. It's been really built up to incorporate a lot of elements from improv.
And that specific program actually takes place where one of our panelists we're going to come from I'm a teacher at that school, so I can also speak to this. It's called the Summit School, and it's a progressive Reggio Montessori mashup. So the junior K program is pre-kindergarten. So we're dealing with the littles that you guys are. And a lot of times these kids, they're coming into school for the very first time. So the play-based structure that exists at Summit, it has to be replicated in all of the trips, in all of the connective tissue that comes in, and all of the teaching artists that come in, and the educators that come in to also offer the program. So one of the things that I actually wanted us to start really thinking about, especially just hearing the end of your improv session, is that idea of saying yes and saying yes and. I think honestly that's one of the most powerful things that you can take from improv. There's a bit of a change that I know that I agree with and disagree a little bit with, is it's not about agreeing. Saying yes is not about saying, oh, you're absolutely correct, I believe what it's saying, yes, you think this. You're affirming a reality. So when a child is offering you a suggestion, maybe it's, I see a ninja, or I'm a ninja. I don't know why I jumped to that. I think because I remember, and even though Rebecca and I never worked together at the Guggenheim, I still remember a little kid saying they saw a ninja in a painting, and me hearing an educator say no. And I was like, wait, no, you can't do that. and if someone says that, your job is not necessarily to say, yes, you are a ninja. Your job is to say, yes, you think you're a ninja. Tell me more about this. So you're affirming that reality that's in existence with the yes and the affirmation that happens in improv. Because as you know, or as I think that you've been learning in the past chunk of time on play is an opt-in. Like the kid has to choose to play for play-based learning to actually take effect. You can't force someone to play. So by giving them something, by giving them a suggestion, they have to agree with it. And you, in turn, if you're playing with them and playing back, you're agreeing to their reality, not necessarily telling them that they're absolutely correct. So I think that's something in improv that's a nuance that's often misunderstood, that a lot of times it's like, oh, I have an improv mindset. I have to agree with absolutely everything that's being said. And that's not the case at all. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to not agree with something. You're allowed to question something. You can't question reality and the reality that gets created. So if a little kid, again, we're going back to that little kid that says, I'm a ninja. Your job is not to say, oh, you can't be a ninja. You're a little boy. Your job can be to ask more about this ninja world that he is creating or she is creating. I really want a little girl ninja right now. Do you have examples of that with Summit in the sense of like them offering and the reality?
So one of the tricky parts of doing the museum program with the junior Ks is that it's a contemporary art museum. It's up there with one of the more difficult things to teach. And I mean, some adults struggle when they come in, and when you're starting fresh with these little junior K kids who are 4 and 5 years old, it's a little tricky with some of the subject matter sometimes. So having this, having the ability to incorporate this yes and mentality is really helpful to making the kids more comfortable in that space. So they come into a space where they're not comfortable. And if you as the educator and the facilitator are encouraging their creativity and their thought process and basically not shutting them down, it not only makes them more comfortable, it also teaches all the other kids around them that it's okay for someone to have a different opinion. And it's really helpful when you're looking at some crazy abstract artwork that nobody really knows what it's supposed to be. And it's a really good teaching tool to get the point across that all these kids can see something different, and that's okay. Like they don't have to agree on it. And it comes to some really fun experiences because there's one artwork we had it was by an Iranian artist, and it had Batman in it. like legit, like Batman was like folded into it, like in the background, like hidden in this really abstract thing. And all these kids were talking about how they see Batman and how they don't see Batman and how they see Catwoman and all these other superheroes. And it led to just a really fun conversation, just because one kid kind of noticed that Batman was actually there and he didn't get shut down by another kid. They kind of just learned to talk it out. And what's nice with the summit program that I run is they come every other Friday for the entire school year. And so we really get to build up on that practice. And by the end of the school year, it's really ingrained in these junior Ks that they can see whatever they want to see. And it's okay if not someone else, if someone else doesn't see the same thing. And it makes for some really great experiences in that space.
And even using concrete things, like kids are going to interpret a concrete thing in any possible way. They might take an umbrella and think about that idea of playing with something that's an umbrella. It could be a sword. It could be a walking stick. It could be something they're dancing with. It could be a guitar. Like, you've got all these possibilities of what it is and what it could be and the association that exists. So by seeing play happen as well, and if you're not a part of it, that addition of, yes, you think that this is an umbrella, and I think that this is a sword, you're allowing someone to see something a little differently. So that yes and mentality is taught actually at Summit School right now with a lot of the kids in conflict resolution as well as in play of, yes, you feel this, you're affirming what that other person is feeling, seeing, thinking, doing, and I feel this. So that word "and" is creating an equality between the two statements. So that way, using the word "but," you're elevating one above the other. You think this is an umbrella, but I think it's a sword. You're actually elevating your own opinion over someone else's. When you say the word and quite literally is an equal sign in the English language. So you're taking those two statements and leveling the playing field on them. And in that sense, when you're both observing play with kids, you've got this creative world happening in front of you, and even hearing some kind of like, oh, but I think it's this, but I think it's this. Having that, well, can it be both? Can you give it both? Can it be Batman and Catwoman? Can you have both of those things? And then you've added this world creation that happens with improv. A little bit I heard about improv is a few different things they were listing. Always agree, always, make strong characters. You can't often be a strong character if that's not your personality. I'm a big proponent of, like, if you don't want to pretend to be someone else when you're in the galleries or in the museum, you don't have to be. At the same time, when you see that happening, helping create that world for those kids, you don't have to take the strong character. You can see these two kids maybe even battling it out in their strong characters, as children generally are, and young children. And what supplements can you add to it? What can you add to make the storyline go further? So if you're in the galleries, then seeing two kids maybe having a disagreement, what aspect can you add? Not as like a primary character, not as a really strong character that takes focus. How can you level that playing field and create this larger world that exists? This is something that I actually learned from you in the sense of world building. And we do a lot of play I directed the third grade play for the past few years at Summit. And notoriously what we've done is the creation of the play has been something that is a build-up school. In about 85 years, they've had 3 headmasters. So this is a pretty serious, this is how it's always been done. So this is how it always will be done type school. And then I come in and I blow it all up with improv and say, hey, we're going to create it with sketch comedy. So I work with the kids when they start off very young all the way up to 3rd grade in this idea of world creation and what they can add, even if they're not a really outgoing, extroverted kid. How can they make that world a little brighter, a little bigger? I had one boy who absolutely did not want to say a single line on stage. He didn't want to be in the play. His mom actually asked me if we could Skype into the play, because as we know, like all kids are not outgoing. All kids are not like crazy and out there and like going to be on stage. Finally talking to him and asking him like where he saw himself adding to what was already happening, he decided he was going to be the dog that always had to pee. And his only line was, uh-oh, I have to pee. Uh-oh, I have to pee. So he threw that in on his own, came up with it on his own. And this kid who was dead set on Skyping, now I'm sure this was a suggestion by mom at some point, still, it's a suggestion he took to me saying that I can't do this. I don't think I could ever do this. He suddenly had this agency over something he created because he was just asked to make that world a little brighter. And in that sense of improv and play, it's about a structure that you're creating. And I'll lend that on to you with Summit, with structure.
So a few things about like the idea of having a structure to play within. So I've learned this over the years, and this is something that Jen initially introduced me to. And it's really the idea that too many options is crippling, and you need to have a structure to play within. So a good example of this is thinking about doing an art activity with students. If you go in and you give the kids glitter and construction paper and glue and scissors and pipe cleaners and 10 other things, they're going to sit there for 10 minutes figuring out what to do. Like, they're not going to really have any idea. They're going to struggle with what materials they want to use. And in a lot of museums, you have a limited time. So that's one aspect of it, is the time aspect. The other aspect is when you limit the materials and build a structure to play within, you encourage more creativity. So something that I do with a lot of the activities for these junior Ks is we give them a handful of materials. And we get inspired by a lot of the artwork we have. So the materials vary from clay, just clay, to maybe paper and glue or markers, or maybe we're going to make a print using styrofoam. And then within that structure, so within that sandbox, they can pretty much take it in whatever direction they want to. However, they feel influenced by that particular artwork. And the stuff that some of these kids come up with is crazy. Like, it's really fun and to see them, because they can attach to those things. You're like, okay, from here on out, I can make whatever I want with these materials moving forward. And it really encourages that creativity to come out, because they're not hampered, they're not paralyzed by all these options that they have in front of them. And the same thing happens to adults too, when they're given too many options. Like, how many of you have been at the grocery store and looked at all the cereal, and it takes you half an hour to just pick out what you want? And it's a very similar idea that you want to limit that. And before we move on too far, one of the really fun ideas, well, not fun ideas, one of the really great ways that improv has helped the students that come through this program is, I've been there long enough that I've seen the junior Ks come through as second graders. And when they come to the museum, every part of the interaction is kind of influenced by improv to encourage creativity in the students. And when they come in as junior Ks, they don't know what a museum is. They don't know what an art museum is. So encouraging them to think about what they think a museum is, and they might sit in there and tell you that, there's a dragon museum or a firefly museum or a unicorn museum or a cupcake museum. And to tell them that that's okay, they get really excited, and then they start to really understand what a museum can be to them. And they really get them to understand that concept. And when I have them come through, it's folded into every part of the process. So even when I'm explaining the museum rules that we have to have because we're an art museum, it works really well when you're talking to kids about reasons why not to touch artwork. And they're like, well, if I touch it, it might fly off the wall and get stuck in the ceiling. Or if I touch it, it might melt. And I'm like, yeah, that could happen. And it really gets that idea across, that the idea is not to touch the artwork. And if they want to take that to crazy town to come up with fun rules for themselves, it works really well. And it really gets it across, because you'll see the kids even kind of regulate one another when they come up with fun things. And if it's something that they came up with themselves, they're more likely to grab the student next to them and say, don't touch that, it's gonna burst into flames, or whatever kind of rule they came up with.
And that applies even where you guys are at. Like we understand that you don't have works of art necessarily hanging on the wall and you have this more interactive component. There's still rules. And these rules and structures that get established, like having that creativity, you can't start thinking and you can't start worrying that if I put too much structure on it, creative play won't happen. Because if there's no structure, if there's no suggestion, just thinking back to what you may have done in this improv workshop, if you didn't get a suggestion, if you didn't get something to like grasp onto, what happened to your brain? It probably emptied out and you had nothing to think of. Like you went completely blank. Or if you're watching someone do something, you're like, wow, I have all of these amazing ideas, because you're not on the spot. So you have all of these amazing ideas over here. But when you're up there, when you're in the moment, when it's your choice to come up with that amazing idea to play with, you have nothing because there's nothing to grab onto. Same principle happens with kids, like that too much creativity is just as bad as not enough. It's a fine line deciding about how much you're going to give. And that's something we can totally talk about, thinking about like what parameters are really helpful. A lot of times it's a simple suggestion. In improv, we tend to get suggestions for moments, for ideas when we're kicking off a new activity. There will always be some kind of suggestion that allows someone to grasp onto something if they want to. Now, that part's key. If they want to use that suggestion, they can run with it. If they don't need it, if they are really great with stream of consciousness thinking and these kids already have this story wrapped up in their head, awesome. It's your job to see how you can make that, again, that world brighter, how you can add to that experience.
Yeah. No, and it's really good when, and I'm sure many of you have had the similar experience, when you have let's say you have an activity or a program that you're having kids go through, and when they're weighed down by the structure, you can see kids get stressed out, or you can see kids start to panic because they think they're doing something wrong. And they think they're going to mess it up, or they're not doing it the right way.
The structure or lack of structure. Like both will stress a kid out.
Exactly. So if you just say, here are some things, do whatever you want.
Play.
They're going to be worrying if they're doing it right or wrong the whole time. Mm-hmm. Then again, if you put too many things on there, they're going to be stressed out about doing it right. So they're like, okay, I have to do step 1, then step 2, then step 3. And when you regulate the amount of structure that you give those kids, so you give them a really good prompt to go along with the activity or whatever you have going on, it really focuses that creativity and gives them permission to kind of create without fear of doing it right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. A really important part of improv that I want to make sure that I get across is, I think improv is so simple. It is just listening and responding to the environment around you. That's it. It is not more complicated than listening and responding. Every conversation you have is improv, because hopefully you're not planning your response in advance. Hopefully you're listening to everything that person said before you say your next thing. And as adults, we're pretty guilty of formulating our answer before that person ends their question, or formulating our next statement before that person finishes their statement. So just giving yourself the grace to take a breath and let a kid even finish talking to you, and let the whole thing come out, the whole word vomit, everything there is, and respond to what they say. Don't put words in their mouth. Don't add things that they haven't added. Sometimes it's about asking a detailed question. If a kid is saying about a crazy dog that runs around in a green shirt and talks to everyone, maybe a really great improv activity is called Last Word, and you take the last word of the previous sentence, and that becomes the first word of your next sentence. Now, you feel a little crazy when you're doing it in an activity form. if you're doing it in real life, you're waiting until that last word comes out and you're basing your next word on that last word. So if that kid's talking about this dog that's running around in a green sweatshirt and being friends with everyone, maybe your question for them becomes, tell me about everyone. Who are the dog's best friends? Because then you're pulling out these bits of creativity in the structure of play that they're already existing in. This kid's got the idea. You're just, again, I think so much of improv, what it does for play-based learning is like it puts a spotlight on their world and it makes things brighter. So if any way you can find to like add and yes and elevate those areas of the world and help that kid come up with a brighter world, that's a really great way to start incorporating improv and seeing the possibilities to it.
And it's something that you see, if you see the same kids multiple times, or if you might see the same kids further down the line, it's something that when it's reinforced, it really builds, and you can see the difference it makes when these kids are encouraged to play and encouraged to create in a way that they can identify with. So not telling them exactly how to play or exactly how to create, but giving them that permission is a really powerful thing, especially for little kids. Because I mean, I've noticed that when I've gotten the second graders, there are kids that haven't been through the program, and then there are kids that have been through the program when they were younger. And there's a noticeable difference in their willingness to share their creativity. And when that's reinforced kind of over and over again, it really hits hard with these kids. And when you hit them young, you know, like we do in the programs that we have, you really impact them moving forward, and they start to see that in different ways that they play.
And what you all get to do is having that experience where they're outside of school, they're outside of home, they're outside of the outside. They're in a space that, yes, learning happens. Yes, interaction happens. It's this outside space of possibility. So giving into those possibilities, as crazy as they may be sometimes and as off the wall, what you're doing is inspiring those moments that they can see those everywhere as opposed to just in certain places. The last thing I know I want to talk about, if you have some things on your list, that a big part of improv, and I think you probably saw this today, I mean, I saw it just in that last activity, is you have each other's back in improv. You are constantly watching out for the other person. It's not your job to shine. It's your job to watch that other person and help them shine because they're helping you. So I performed off-Broadway for about 10 years before I stopped acting with improv. I trained at Second City, and before every show in my off-Broadway theater, and I still use this even when we're training corporations now, and we would hug each other. We don't hug in corporate, but we would hug each other and say, got your back. And I think that's really important in the sense of playing, that having each other's back and having that kid that you're playing with or inspiring play, or that coworker that you maybe are creating that world, like not having them worry about looking stupid or wrong or incorrect, and knowing that as wild as the idea is, you're going to back it up. And that having one another's back in improv, like no one person shines. There's no one shiny penny. It's everyone is contributing to the greater good, as opposed to stand-up, which is like one person on stage talking to everybody, kind of like that lecture-based format in those really fun museums. But it's about creating together and having this sort of this team mentality. So what was happening at the end of being like the hype person, like you don't have to go up to the kid and be like, yeah, kid, you're doing a good job. Woo! You can say what you're doing looks really amazing. Can I help? Or can you tell me about it? Or even adding to it. If they're like, hey, come play with us. Come do this with us. Like run around with them. If you become a dinosaur, I've been a dinosaur in Sika more than once. We've walked through the galleries as dinosaurs. when I've chaperoned a trip over there. And that idea of coming up with something, that wasn't my idea to be a dinosaur in the museum. That wasn't his idea. That was how the kids interpreted keep your hands at your side. It was, let's be dinosaurs. Or another kid that we were working with we did work together with the autism program, and it was, again, little tiny ones. And one little kid, we walked around the room as a fluffy lobster. A fluffy lobster. I don't know what that is, but your job is to affirm that fluffy lobster. So you are the best damn fluffy lobster that you possibly could be. Not that, oh, lobsters aren't fluffy. Are you sure you're not thinking of something else? It's like, you are a fluffy lobster. You are a really, really good fluffy lobster. And that sense, he's not saying, oh, well, like, science shows me there's fluffy lobsters. No, he wants to be a fluffy lobster, and he wants you to be one too. So having his back, or their back in that sense, and not saying that, well, actually, or correcting, is something that I think is really, that's that part of improv, reality. You're not saying that, yes, you are too a fluffy lobster. You're saying, anything to add before we ask questions?
Yeah, well, just to reinforce that idea of really having your back and really supporting one another, that's something that, and also Jen mentioned the idea of museums and museum-like institutions as being this third space. So you're not bound by those rules that you're learning at school. You're not bound by the rules that you're learning at home. You have this space of possibility that you can come to. And I know that I was guilty of this when I first started. I shut those kids down in the beginning, and I made that space. I took that possibility that space had. I took that away from those kids when they came in for the first time. And knowing that I did that, I'm extra motivated to not do that to any new kids that are coming in. Because we have this, I don't know what to say, if it's a responsibility, we have the opportunity as museums and these learning institutions to give these kids permission and to show them that play and creativity can be really fun at the same time of like using these skills of improv to have them have one another's back. Because when you're a kid and you get excited about something and someone else gets excited about that, that's really cool. I mean, even as adults, we get really psyched when someone gets like excited about something that we like. And if you can teach all the kids that come through in any given class to also get excited about that, then they're gonna get excited about one another's stuff, and they can really see that because they really they're like, I really like how this feels. I want to make this other person feel the same way because it's a really cool thing when someone gets excited about that. And I've really found that incorporating these improv like principles.
This is like the surface that has been scratched, though. Just FYI.
It's really impactful for these young kids because then when by the end of the year, I get these kids for 9 months. By the end of the year, they are on it. They have one another's back. They are shooting ideas out. And these are junior Ks. And it's hard, like, I have to have them, like, I have to have some, like, tactics to make them kind of slow down and not talk so we can kind of get through even because they're so excited about sharing and creating.
And it's a lot easier to pull someone back with creativity than to push someone forward. It's a lot easier to hone in ideas and like laser focus them than to psych someone up. I mean, just think about those of you that raised your hand thinking that you were shy or saying that you were shy, like getting you to do something big is really, really difficult. Toning it in is easy. I think before we open it up to questions, just to reiterate that improv is not something that you can figure out in like an hour or an hour and a half or anything. Like I've personally been doing it. I'm 36 now. I started doing improv when I was 15, and I've been teaching it with my company now for 6 straight years, and we've taught over, I think, 40,000 people in 6 years, and I'm constantly surprised. I'm still surprised by the different people and the different things that come up through improv. Alex, by knowing me, has been doing it now for 4 years.
4 years. Yep.
For 4 years, been doing improv, and he's gotten here after 4 years of this mentality, this practice, this thought process. So it's more of a marathon. It's more of like training your brain improv than downloading it and knowing everything. So it's this idea of like, okay, well, that's why I asked you, like, what works? What worked in the activities that you guys just did, and what didn't work? Because not everything is going to work for you with improv, and that's okay. It's hanging on to the things that do and running with those things. So I think we hit exactly 40 minutes, Rebecca. I am ready for questions.
I see kids, the junior Ks that I see them every other Friday. So there's 2 classes, so I get one every Friday, and I see them for about an hour, hour and a half. And this is something that I run into on a fairly regular basis. They're young kids. Some of the little boys in particular can be very aggressive and very mean. Bananas. And something that I found is give them a creative outlet for their frustrations is something that has worked on my end. And I know that may not always be doable. It has helped because what I've found is that the kids that have come through my program are either bored about what you're talking about, they're not understanding it, so they get angry, like they feel like they're stupid because they're not understanding it. So it's trying to pivot to kind of figure out where that frustration is coming from, and then find a creative outlet to help take care of that aggression or that anxiety or that stress that they may have. And now with my program, we do art activities just about every time. So they come in, we do some gallery experiences, we do some activities, and then we do some kind of art activity. And something that I've found is that the more complex the activity, the more pronounced the aggression is on some of those kids. So if it's too structured, it tends to draw out that aggression a bit more because they get frustrated and then they take it out on their classmates. So if you have something like that, have an activity and then kind of dial it back to make it more simple. So like material wise or prompt wise, so they can take it in a direction where they feel like they're succeeding.
I handle things a little differently. Some of my training is a lot of it in ABA, so in the sense of like positive reinforcement, like working with kids on the spectrum. And this is not saying that the kids that you're talking about are on the spectrum. This is saying there's a lot to be learned from this. And one of the big things working with kids with autism is if you know one kid with autism, you know one kid with autism. Like you don't know how everyone is going to react. What I've found from both ABA and dealing with kids that are typically developing kids is I give choices a lot. It's very like, hey, we can do this or we can do this. And it's much so in the sense of like, if we're gonna go and do this and have fun, you have to be with me on this. Otherwise, we can do the not fun way of this. Like you have 2 options. And I let them choose. At my school, I'm known as that teacher. I mean, I'm a teaching artist there. I'm known as the teacher. They joke that Mrs. Brown is just gonna sit and drink her coffee if we're not listening, because I do. Because I don't yell. I don't like punish. I'm not that kid, that teacher. I'll say, okay, here are my rules. Here is my structure. We can have so much fun in this structure. And if you go against this structure, like I have very simple rules, like no disrespect, no talking over one another or me, no touching, like pushing, shoving in improv or anything like that, like hands to yourself. The minute that happens, I just stop. I stop, I sit, I wait. And it is a groupthink mentality that ends up developing, works with the junior Ks and works with they have a new level of students now. They have the eaglets, Summit Eagles, so they're like the 3-year-olds. Works the same with them too. It's this idea of like, okay, well, we can do the fun way and we have to listen. We have to do these things to do the fun. And if we don't do the fun, so you're reinforcing the positive behavior, it's positive reinforcement, and you're just taking it away for the negative behavior. So it's that option. It's putting a lot of choice and structure into them. And most kids are going to choose to do the fun. They're going to choose to be like, oh, well, if I just pull it in and rein it in and stop it, then I can have fun. And I get the kids that their teachers are like, how are they like this with you? I'm like, because I don't give, they have a choice. Like, they know that I will not yell. They won't get in trouble. They won't sit aside. We'll just all stop. So thinking about like where you are in the museum and like where you are in your organization. So if you're in a specific area on the floor, I'm just thinking of our children's museum of Callidium that's here. There's a lot of interactive areas. There's a whole health area. There's like a more physics and building area. It becomes less about a free-for-all in that space and just watching the kids to make sure something doesn't happen, than to really investigating ways in for those kids. So say you're in a physics-based area where, and I say physics very loosely, building. So you're using blocks and you're maybe creating something with it. Maybe it becomes, hey, let's see if we can make the tallest, or let's see, like giving that suggestion, or how would you maybe create a museum of your own out of these blocks? And just thinking about suggestions you can give, almost prompts, because then it's not just a pile of blocks. That kid that doesn't quite know how to play with those blocks maybe will have a jumping off point. Or, hey, can you maybe make, what's your favorite thing, I might ask, if I was seeing a kid struggling a little bit, or not even struggling, just kind of looking at what to do with it. And maybe they say, here, what's your favorite thing, kid?
Spaghetti.
Spaghetti, great. What do you like about spaghetti?
It's messy.
It's messy. Can we make the messiest looking building ever?
Spaghetti building.
Spaghetti building.
All
so
right.
let's make a spaghetti building. And so then, thank you for being a good child. But having those prompts and those ways in to interact with around you, that's structure. That's more than just saying, here, go. You're giving that kid something to grasp onto. You're giving that kid that suggestion. And that can be applied, like thinking of the best way to have these open-ended experiences. I didn't say like, hey kid, make me a dentist office. Or hey kid, make me a mall. It was like, hey, what's your favorite thing? Or let's build the tallest building ever. Let's build the tallest thing ever. And then letting them even create the world around it. Asking them, what's the name of your building? Who lives there? Does anyone live there? And getting them to think about that world building is a nice way to incorporate some of that structure, even on the floor. Just asking them questions and responding to their answers again, that's structure too, because you're not just letting them do it by themselves, you're joining in.
And it's really helpful too when you have limited time. So for example, you said you have 10 minutes. So sometimes when I'm in the gallery with the kids and we're going to look at a few artworks, okay, we have either 5 or 10 minutes to look at this one thing. And so you want to make the most out of that time, and having a open-ended type prompt that you can give those kids, it cuts down on your talking time basically, and it gives them more time to be creative and to explore and kind of make that experience their own. And it's that kind of structure that it's really good for that type of experience, because you're like, okay, here's a prompt, here's the open-ended idea, and then they can kind of just get into it and start experiencing it right away.
And I'm sure you've seen kids walk into spaces that you've been at and they just kind of look around and they don't quite know how to interact with what's there. Because if they've gone to an institution before, they think they can't touch anything. If depending on where they live or what their school is like or what their life is like outside of that moment, again, that freedom is crippling because it's too much. There's too much openness. There's not enough structure. So they don't know how to interact. So having those few prompts in your back pocket for those moments, that adds that bit of like that grasping onto, that suggestion that they can hold on to.
something that we had at Sika a few years back was this massive table.
Oh yeah.
It was kind of an artwork and also interactive at the same time. So it was this really, really big table, probably 5 feet by 10 feet long.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire table had about 2,000 or 3,000 of these little clay people buildings. They were little buildings that had faces on them. Very strange, all of them completely unique. And one of the issues we had is that it kind of became a free-for-all when we would get to that. Because it was big enough for a whole class to fit around, and then they would kind of just, they would knock it over like it was just wooden blocks. And when I gave them a bunch of different prompts that were focused around open-ended questions about what's in a city, or what they would put in their city, or what kind of buildings they would like to see, or what does this building do? And then they would that would focus their play. So it wasn't a complete free-for-all. It was like directing that energy so they could, then they would build their own little city area, or build their own little neighborhood, mm-hmm. or tell you what they would want to put in it. So having that prompt to focus that free-for-all is really helpful in situations like that.
Mm-hmm.